Gmod is not a horror game. It's a sandbox. That said, pretty much since the game's inception, players have been obsessed with trying to leverage its eerie undertones in order to create horror. Over the years, Gmod horror has been everything from scary maps and ARGs to loud 2D images. And throughout all that time, one thing has always been true. Gmod horror kinda sucks. That said, for all the terrible Gmod horror in the workshop, there are rare instances of good Gmod horror. And knowing the community, it should come as no surprise to hear that, for all the good and bad horror out there, there are just as many mods that are just plain controversial. But there's one specific Garry's Mod add-on that stands tall above the rest when it comes to good horror and controversy. An add-on more controversial, more popular, and even more terrifying than any other mod ever made.
Oh my god!
Way to go about it!
LiDAR. Released in May of 2022, this mysterious add-on hit the Garry's Mod workshop and immediately began exploding with subscriptions and 5-star ratings. Within a week, LiDAR was already one of the most popular add-ons around. But what could possibly cause such a nondescript add-on to gain so much traction? Well, firstly, it might have had something to do with its creator, Datae, who, for reasons I'll cover later in the video, is easily one of the most infamous figures in Gmod history. And secondly, despite sitting a tiny, average, more than enough 28 megabytes, LiDAR was just straight up crazy. Even at a glance, it's not difficult to see why people were so fascinated. Its innovative scanning mechanic, combined with insanely unique and interesting visual style, created an experience barely recognisable as Garry's Mod at all. With videos showcasing gameplay garnering frankly ridiculous views, countless players began sprinting to the workshop to get a taste of exploring maps they loved in an entirely new way. But what naive Gmod fans would find within the 28 megabytes of Lua code making up the mod was so shocking, it may as well have been a Darman video. With everything from online discussion threads to actual gaming media publications warning of something far more sinister being hidden within LiDAR, it's clear the mod wasn't being all that truthful about its intentions. But with comments on the add-on's webpage mysteriously disabled, and me, frankly needing a video, let's delve into the darkness to discover what all the fuss was about. Have you ever felt lost? If not, you should like and subscribe to immediately lose all bearings. But pretty much everyone has core childhood memories of getting lost and the feelings that came with it. So much so that the fear actually has its own name, mesophobia. For good reason, these associated emotions have been at the core of countless iconic horror media, but for as much reason as there is to fear getting lost in an unfamiliar place, you can probably also think of a few places so familiar to you that you have zero worry of ever losing your way. In Gmod, GM Construct is undoubtedly that place. It's easily the game's most iconic map, and I'm sure 99% of players would tell you that even blind, they could perfectly navigate it. And you'd probably agree. Except, despite racking up countless hours in playtime on the map, with LiDAR, it never took long for players to find themselves in utter confusion as to where they were.
It's things like this that allow you to kind of live inside your own head a little bit. Hello, where am I? It is so crazy to think that this is a map that I know like the back of my hand. Before this, I probably would have told you that I could navigate with my eyes closed, but I'm just not sure where I am right now.
Now, you might think that the confusion could have had something to do with the trippy visual effect of the scanner, removing just enough identity from spaces. Or maybe it was just the general darkness. But as a lot of the community became quickly aware, this was too real to be an optical illusion. Even simple things, moving in pretty much a straight line from spawn to the garages for example, seemed to render players in a completely different location. And as it turns out, hidden from sight, LiDAR had been playing tricks. A trick as simple as horizontally flipping the map.
Of taking a long exposure photo. I think right now we're in the garages off to the side. But I'm just not totally sure. Yeah, I think so, because up here should be the staircase where you can walk above all that. Let's see.
Fellow horror-adjacent Gmod add-on GM Construct 13 Beta used similar methods to great effect, with corridors seemingly creating endless loops and a mirror world which flipped the map in the same way as LiDAR.
Really trippy thing to explore. It's kind of crazy how simply flipping something horizontally made me feel completely disoriented and lost in an iconic level from a video game I've spent an ungodly amount of time in.
Given the already tense underscore, the metaphobia that was induced even on a map as iconic as GM Construct, even beyond all the stupid liminal Gmod horror shit, is actually pretty startling, even to a hulking, roided out beast such as myself. And the thousands of players, unknowingly wrapping themselves deeper in confusion, were about to discover just how much Datae had packed into the 28 megabytes of Lua code that made up LiDAR, blindly stumbling into a discovery of a far more disturbing nature.
Oh my god!
I need this kind of behind me as well, just in case.
If you think about it, that's a really cool way to go about it. I see now why you guys wanted me to play this.
What the fuck was that?
You are not alone. Even with the mod explicitly not being a horror game, the creepy, ominous atmosphere was plain to see, from tricks being played with the map, the inherent eeriness of playing blind, and the abject weirdness of the lack of any ambience. No matter who was playing, even a hulking obelisk of masculinity like me could feel tension. Which on its own would have already been impressive for Gmod, but the revelation of an entity inhabiting the map with you was enough to scare the actual fuck out of most of the predominantly child audience playing the game. For context, LiDAR released on the workshop right towards the end of the ARG boom, and the revelation of an entity lurking within your copy of Gmod was a wet dream for most of the people fiending over the trend. And although it wasn't a move loved by all, in many ways even on that front it was a genius move for LiDAR's popularity, with several Explorer versions of the map that removed the entity being created, which in their own right were popular. Upon encountering the Red Man, the LiDAR system seemingly crashes, sending you to a reboot screen. Loading back into the game, you're met with a shadow of the figure, and pressing tab you'll make the startling discovery that it's not just an ordinary NPC, but appears to be some kind of other player. Understandably, even this absolutely terrified a lot of players who had no idea this kind of trick was even possible. And as you swing your mouse around in the heat of that panic, discovering that the map is now back in the darkness it was when you first joined, a slowly growing ambience rises to greet you. The atmosphere of empty Gmod servers is iconic, and while the more cliché elements that we're frankly sick of talking about at this point are only enhanced by LiDAR, one of the most important aspects of building that canopsic atmosphere is ambience. Ambient sounds are key to immersing you in a game and making you feel grounded. Simply removing your headphones, for example, can remove all tension from a horror game, appending all the work that goes into making it scary. But LiDAR is weird. From the jump, apart from the scanner, the mod has no sound. And like I said, usually that would just kill any work Datae had done to make the mod immersive and actually fun. But somehow it makes LiDAR even more unnerving. The sheer contrast between the sounds that greet you in a regular map like GM Construct and the dead silence of LiDAR hit you like a brick wall, and follow you until you're blindsided by the Red Man. In any other mod, I'd write that off as an amateur mistake, but knowing what comes next, it's absolutely a deliberate choice which makes it even more impressive. And with everything having come together at this point, it's easy to see why LiDAR rose to such meteoric claim amongst Gmod fans. Not only was the idea behind the mod unique and actually fun to play around with, it essentially gave two completely different experiences pre and post Redman, to the extent that the exploration exclusive versions of the mod I referenced earlier were created to fully enjoy that side. And the horror within the mod, while not my thing and admittedly pretty much boiling down to a jump scare, was genuinely unexpected and terrifying to the majority of players, and added another dimension to an already interesting piece of content. But then again, none of this should have come as a surprise given the identity of LiDAR's creator. With a history of creating some of Gmod's most influential community content, surely there was no ensuing drama waiting just around the corner to derail all of LiDAR's success, right? I don't think it's a stretch to say that Datae is the most hated Gmod player of all time. I know I was just sucking the straight out of his but those who knew the name knew this was coming. For undeniably being one of the most talented and influential mod developers in the game's history, the guy is every bit as controversial. And that controversy is inevitably tied to every one of his mods, LiDAR included. So to understand how Datae's reputation affected LiDAR, we need to learn why Datae is so controversial. Gmod realism. It was one of the game's biggest ever trends about a year ago, with videos showcasing realism builds garnering view counts in the millions. As the creator of mods like vminit, which were essentially the cornerstone of the whole trend, Datae became a massive figure in the modding community. People trusted Datae, but as big as the realism mods were, I don't think they scratched the popularity of his next, and easily most well-known project. Beatrun was a parkour mod that basically ripped Mirror's Edge's whole shit and plugged it into Gmod. This was big, as for how old Gmod is, there's generally been almost zero good parkour oriented mods hit the workshop. And the desperation for parkour was clear to see, as early showcases on Datae's YouTube channel raked in view counts even larger than Gmod realism on their own. But with the quickly growing horde of fans desperate to get their hands on Beatrun, Datae began to make a series of moves so controversial and literally illegal that he went from hero to public enemy number 1 overnight. On its highly anticipated release, Beatrun was nowhere to be found in the workshop. It could instead be found behind a nice big wall, a paywall on Datae's Patreon. Needless to say, this made people angry. So angry that pirated copies of Beatrun began to flood the internet. Now, people's trust in Datae was already shaky, but his next move, well, was to not only ban every player whose Steam account showed even a hint of being a pirate, but to make an example of every pirate he caught, by leaking them free malware-injected copies of the mod, then stealing and publicly displaying their personal information online for everyone to see. And while the more red-blooded members of the community didn't see much wrong with sticking it to the commies, almost everyone began to see Datae as a monster with no regard for ethics. Comments ranged from people pointing out the blatant hypocrisy in putting stolen IP behind a paywall, to calling out the apparent xenophobia of almost exclusively targeting Russians. The whole controversy left a really bad smelly taste in people's mouths, and as you can imagine, even affected Datae's other mods. Both the add-ons and his own profile's comments were flooded with people harassing Datae for his actions, eventually leading to all comments being disabled even to this day. Some even went as far as, in a twist of irony, ripping off LiDAR and releasing their own versions just so they wouldn't be supporting him. Now, I won't speak on the efficacy of profiting from stolen IP or apparent xenophobia, but as terminally online as this drama was, at the time the effect it had on the perception of Datae and pretty much all of his mods is undeniable. The reality is that while a lot of the core community dropped everything associated with the guy, the wider player base is pretty much ambivalent, and while LiDAR definitely isn't as popular now as it was at the time, that can't just be chalked up to Beatrun. Realistically, given how brain-rotted the Gmod fanbase is, especially these days, Garry's Mod add-ons are always bound to have a pretty limited shelf life. And given that by its very nature LiDAR removed a lot of Gmod's core mechanics, people were eventually going to move on no matter how appreciative they were. That said, I think one of the greatest compliments something can receive, whether it be a song, artist, video game, or indeed a mod, is imitation. And while LiDAR's popularity may have waned, for a 28MB Gmod add-on, it was pretty damn influential. Although the mod itself was inspired by Scanner Sombra, a relatively unknown indie horror title from 2017, LiDAR helped to inspire a small horror renaissance. Following the add-on's rise to virality, a string of widely covered games taking advantage of the LiDAR gimmick emerged, with Steel Krill Studios' The Voidness probably being the most recent example. And whenever the LiDAR concept is used, it seems to be a hit with audiences online. But unfortunately, the vast majority of titles seem to be smallish indie studios that never pick up much traction. My honest hope is that in future we'll see LiDAR used more as a tool for horror games that really make an impact. But as for Gmod LiDAR, despite literally standing as the most popular game mode of all time in the Gmod workshop, I honestly believe it's still pretty underrated. As far as Gmod horror goes, it's easily one of the best, if for no other reason, because you can completely remove the horror and it's still an impressively transformative experience. And while it'll always be a little disappointing to be linked with a figure as controversial as Datae, the majority of players have either looked past it or had no idea to begin with. So, what's today's big takeaway? While there's undoubtedly a lot to learn, I think the biggest lesson is to like the video. Anyway, I'll see you in another video, And if I don't see you, good afternoon, good evening, and good night.